Hey guys, Casey Ferris here. Thanks for checking out another video of mine here on YouTube. Today, we are talking about the concept of switching from whatever you're using to Resolve and using it as your main software for producing video content. And we're going to walk through the big question, should I switch to Resolve, by answering some of the smaller questions kind of based on our workflow. So let's check it out. Here I am in Resolve 15. I'm in the edit page, and I have an edit mostly put together here in the timeline. The first thing that I would consider if I need to make a video is, can I actually edit with this software? The good news really simply is yes. The edit page in the last couple years has really become a full-featured, very, very well done editing app. This is a simple timeline, but it's all been built inside of Resolve, and it has tracks and a playhead, and you can nest clips and do all of the things that you would expect an editor to do. The editing app that I've used the most in the past few years has been Adobe Premiere. So if I'm talking about switching to Resolve, the question is, can Resolve do everything that Premiere can? My honest opinion, the edit page in Resolve I think can do everything that Premiere can do, other than some specialized effects that you might be used to working with the Adobe programs. All of the basic editing and the workflow for creating an edit is pretty much exactly the same. We have our timeline viewer up here. This is what the person watching your project will actually see. Up here is our source viewer, and we can open whatever clips that we have and preview them here in the source. Let's say I want to use this clip. I can set ins and outs just like I would inside of Premiere by hitting I and O on the keyboard. And when I want to edit this down into the timeline, I can either just drag it down like this, or I can drag it over here and get quite a bit of different options for where I want to put this. One of my favorites is append at end, and that just throws that there at the end of our sequence. So let's take a look at what this is like. So let's say I want this to cut out right there when that music hits. I'll just grab the end and roll it back, just like I would in Premiere. Now, one thing that I want to do is adjust this clip and zoom it in a little bit because the aspect ratio is a little bit different than my project. What I'm going to do is select this clip in my timeline, and I'm going to go up here to the upper right and click this button that says Inspector. This is pretty much like your effect controls in Premiere. Whatever is selected in the timeline brings up the controls here. And so I'm just going to zoom that in a little bit, and let's play it back. Great. So I have my whole project built here in the edit page. Like I said, certainly just as capable of an editor as Premiere in my experience. But now let's talk about the next step. Generally, if I wanted to do some, let's say, detailed audio mixing, I would start sending something to Audition. You might even export your project to Pro Tools. You would kind of bring it to another app to do some detailed tweaking, and then you'd be sending it back to your NLE. Of course, for basic things like messing with levels, editing and trimming things in the timeline, you can do that all within the Edit tab. But if you want to get a little bit more detailed, all you have to do is go down to the buttons at the bottom of the interface and click the one that says Fairlight. And as I do that, my whole interface switches over, and Resolve pretty much turns into a dedicated audio app. I don't want to minimize how amazing this is, because you can take your whole timeline and just move it to this other page in Resolve, and you have all of these super detailed audio controls, plugins. Is this as useful as something like Audition or Pro Tools or a dedicated audio app? The answer in my experience is yes. Let's take a look at just a couple things. In the Fairlight page, we have our timeline here, and there are two tracks. We have our voiceover and our music, and this was brought over from our edit page. Now we have these laid out for us to use inside of Fairlight. If I go over to my mixer, we have our channel strips here, and this square in the middle of track 2, I'm just going to double click that. That's going to bring up my dynamics window for the track. This is freaking amazing. It's a bunch of really awesome dynamics effects all kind of built into the channel strip. And so let's say I want to add a compressor to our audio. See how that sounds. Specifically making this solid. And let's also put a limiter on that to kind of bring it down a little bit. This solid on a rooftop. This isn't something I'm going to go over in super detail. But if you're familiar with a compressor and a limiter and all of those things that it does to the audio, those are all available right there. You can even do something called sidechaining by just clicking one button. This is my voiceover, so I'm going to hit send. And what that's going to do is send a signal to another sidechain effect, which I'm going to put on our music track by just going over to track 3, double-clicking, and putting on the compressor and clicking listen. So now, anytime that this voiceover comes in,
specifically
it actually makes my music a little bit quieter automatically. That's a really cool way to do it. And that's a pretty standard thing as far as like audio effects go, but it's all built into the channel strips here. So I don't even have to add effects or anything. Those are just built in to the tracks. Also, this voiceover was actually recorded here in Fairlight. To make that happen, all I have to do is set my input for my track and arm it to record and record it. So let's say we wanted to record something else. I'll set my playhead over here, go back over to my mixer, and right here on this little input picker, click on that and select input. And this will bring up my patch input output, which looks kind of complicated, but just pretend that you're plugging a digital audio cable from your microphone into the program. So I'm going to select my microphone and I'm going to select the track that I want, which happens to be audio 2. Click that and hit patch. All that's going to do is just set my input for that track. You can do all kinds of fancy things with that. And now I can just go over to my audio 2 and hit this R button. And here we can see, and if I want to record something, here I go, recording. And I can record audio right into my timeline. There are a ton of features in the Fairlight page. It's as deep as a separate app might be, but it's built inside of Resolve. Is it good enough to do basically any kind of audio mixing for your projects? In my opinion, I'd say definitely. And the coolest part is that whatever changes that I make in this page, say I wanted to fade all this out for some weird reason, and then turn it purple. Any of those changes, if I go back to my edit page, are going to show up in my edit timeline as well. And you can go back and forth as much as you want because there's no rendering. It just moves it into the different pages of the app. Pretty freaking amazing. In fact, I'm actually going to get rid of that fade right here in the edit page. Really nice. The other thing that I do a lot is make graphics for things. You pretty much can't have a video without graphics these days. That's something I would normally use After Effects for. Can Resolve handle something that I would probably make in After Effects? The answer to that is the Fusion page. What I'm going to do is make some graphics to go over this guy who I've named Jeff Dawes for no reason other than that's what I said during the voiceover. And I want his name to pop up here. I'm going to go over to my media pool, right click, and select New Fusion Composition. And we'll call this Jeff Title and hit Create. And what that's going to do is make a new thumbnail here in my media pool. And if I double click that, that's going to open up a new composition inside of the Fusion page. This is essentially like making a new After Effects project. Now, this is the point where most people probably get really scared because, well, nothing is here. Nothing makes any sense. Nothing is kind of similar to After Effects. It's just very scary. I do have quite a bit of videos on working with Fusion. I'm going to move pretty fast in this part of the video. But if you want a basic guide on what the heck Fusion is and a little bit more detail on the things that I'm doing here, check out this video, and that should make things a lot more clear. But the short of the long is that we are going to build something with a set of instructions. And the instructions are called nodes, where After Effects uses layers, Fusion uses these things. So the first thing I'm going to do is make a background, which I can do by grabbing this little button right here and dragging it down into my graph. That's going to make a background node. All this is saying is draw a black background. And I'm going to grab the little square to the right of it and connect it over here into this node. Look what happens here in my screen. We can see a black background. And I'm just going to build my text over this background, and then we're going to make the background transparent. First thing I need is text. I'm going to go to the third button here, which is a T, and just grab this, drag it down, and that makes a text node. That basically just tells Fusion to write some text. But if I do anything in this node right now, nothing's going to happen because it isn't connected to anything. This node right here, media out, is what the viewer is going to see. So anything that's connected to this, that's what they're going to see. You'll see there's two little dots right here, and the right dot is white. That means that whatever's happening in this node is up here in the right viewer. If I were to click on the left dot you'll see it happens in the left viewer. These are just two viewers that can show whatever nodes you pick for each viewer. So let's select text 1, and I'll click on the left dot, and you'll see we have this checkerboard because there's nothing going on. If I go over to the inspector, which is where you control pretty much anything that you have selected, I'm going to type Jeff Dawes, select a different font here, and over here in my left viewer, we can see that things are actually happening. So I think I'll make it a little bigger, and I'm going to merge this over my background. There's a ton of ways to do that, but the easiest way is to grab the output of this text and drag it over the little gray box to the right of my background node. That's going to do some fanciness. And then look up here, we have our text over our black background. It's looking pretty good, but I want this text to animate in. And so what I'm going to do is add a mask. I'm going to grab my text node here and go up to kind of the middle of my toolbar here where it says rectangle. And I'm just going to click it once, and that's going to add a mask to my text. You can see that here in the viewer. And if I go over to my inspector, I can adjust all kinds of things with this mask. I think I'm going to make it really wide, but not quite as high. And what's happening is that everything inside of this mask you can see, everything outside of it you can't. So if I were to take this text node and go up to my inspector here in the second little tab under the layout tab, I can adjust a property called center, and I'll just move this down a little bit. There we can see it hides the text because the text isn't within that mask anymore. So I'll reset that to 0.5. And I'm going to come here in my timeline to, I don't know, about 15 frames in or so. And I'm going to set a keyframe. I'm going to do that by just clicking this little diamond here to the right of my center. Then I'm going to move to the beginning of our comp, which is all the way to the left. And I'm going to grab this Y and just slide it to the left, which is going to hide my text. And now let's see how this animates. If I go to the start of this composition and then hit spacebar, we see that kind of brings up my text. Looks good. We're going to do two more things. First thing we'll do is make this background transparent. I'm going to do that by selecting my background node, going over to the inspector, and just dragging down the alpha. So now we just have this text over nothing. I'm also going to add a drop shadow to the text. So I'm going to grab my text1 node. And now I'm going to go up here to my effects library and open that up. And then under tools, under effect, I'm going to grab an effect called shadow and just click it once. And what that'll do is add a shadow effect after my text, which I can adjust here in the inspector. I'll just mess with the offset a little bit, maybe make it a little softer. And there we have some basic graphics. Fusion, just like Fairlight, is its own app, just built inside of Resolve. It can do so much stuff. And now we've built this comp that we can use as graphics inside of our edit page. Here's how we do that. What I'm going to do is just go down to my buttons in the lower part of the interface and click on edit. That's going to switch back over to my edit page. And now I can go over to my media pool and grab my Jeff title and just grab it and drag it down into the timeline. And there we have our graphics, like we made in the Fusion page. And I can adjust and edit these just like footage. And I have this available to use wherever I want throughout my project. I can duplicate it, I can change it, and anytime that I want to, I can select it and go back to the Fusion page to edit something if I don't like it. Super powerful. Another major aspect of post-production these days is color correction, which of course Resolve is amazing at. Resolve has traditionally been a color grading program, so it's naturally very good at that. But I was used to working with a color correction plugin, or maybe even round tripping to a different app, or even just using a built-in like three-way color effect. And Resolve does things a little bit differently when it comes to color, but it's super powerful. When it's time to do color correction on my project, all I have to do is go down here to the bottom part of the interface and click on the color button. That's going to switch my whole project over to the color page. And that's going to bring up every single clip from my project, and whatever one I have selected, that's the one that I'm working on. Let's grab this wide shot and we can adjust some of the color. If you're familiar with color scopes, those are available inside of Resolve. If you go down to the lower right-hand corner, there's a little button here that kind of looks like a graph. Click on that once and that will bring up your color scopes. The one I like to use is called a Parade. If you don't know how to use color scopes, check out this video, and that should get you some help there. But just like I would inside of a plugin or a three-way color corrector, I can adjust my image based on the highlights, like the brightest parts, the darkest parts, and the midtones, which inside of Resolve is called Lift, Gamma, Gain. Lift for the darkest parts, Gamma for the midtones, and Gain for the brightest parts of the image. And I have two controls for each one. This color wheel adjusts the actual color cast and the saturation. This little circle arrow resets things. And this little slider down here is called the master wheel, and that adjusts the brightness of that part of the image. So if I wanted to adjust the way that this image looked, I don't have to load an effect or do anything crazy. All I have to do is have it selected in the timeline and go down here to my color wheels and change the things that I don't like about it. Maybe I want the darker parts to be darker. Maybe I don't think that these highlights are bright enough. I'm going to push the gain up just a little bit. And maybe I need some more saturation. Saturation you can find down here in the primary controls: contrast, pivot, saturation, hue, and luma mix. I can just grab this saturation number and just boost it up a little bit and stop when I like it. Maybe I also want to warm this up a little bit. So I'm going to go down to the gamma wheel and just push it towards warm just a little bit. I like that. And I can go through each shot and make whatever adjustments that I want. But let's say I want to quickly copy this look to the other shots in my timeline. Super easy to do. All I have to do is grab the next shot, hold down Shift and grab the last shot, and then I'll mouse over the clip that is already graded, and I'm going to middle button mouse click. And that's going to copy that color correction over to the other shots. Now, this isn't perfect. You're probably going to want to go through and tweak the other shots just because that's how reality is. But I can really quickly get a starting point for my whole project, or just quickly make it a little better with a basic grade. If I don't have a middle button mouse, by the way, I could also right click and select Apply Grade. Now, the color page in Resolve, again, is super deep. There's a ton of stuff that you can do. It can be kind of intimidating, but if you're used to just working with like a three-way color corrector or even curves, they're right there in the interface and you can adjust them and you can just use those. You don't have to get complicated. If color is something you're not really that familiar with, just think of the color page as just a dedicated color plugin. So, can it replace other color tools? Plugins inside of Premiere or Final Cut? The color page is the best color grading tool available, in my opinion. It's not even a contest. So let's say we have everything done. We're excited and we want to render our project, but we want to render with multiple different versions. This is something that I would normally do inside of Adobe Media Encoder. If I want to make a version for Archive, one for Instagram, one for YouTube, one for Facebook, you don't want to render it with different settings from your timeline 3 or 4 times. You want to just be able to queue everything up and then set it and go get lunch. Well, Resolve can do that too. And again, it's built in. You don't need to go to a different app. Once I'm ready to render, I'll just go down here to the buttons at the bottom and click on Deliver. That's going to bring up my project here in a different interface, which is focused on rendering. Up here in the upper left, we have our render settings, which is where you'll spend most of your time. This is basically just all of the fancy controls for whatever you're going to make. So let's say I want to make a version for YouTube. I can just click on the YouTube preset up here. And if I want to, I can go down and adjust different aspects of this file. Let's say that's fine. I can set my file name. Let's call this Cooking YT for YouTube. And I'll click Add to Render Queue right here. What that does is it takes my timeline and decides that it's going to render it with these settings and adds a job to this list over here called the render queue to wait. If you're familiar with something like Adobe Media Encoder or Apple Compressor, this should make a ton of sense. It's the same thing. Let's say I want to make a different version. Let's say I want to do a Vimeo 720. Same thing, just call it something that makes sense. Add to render queue. Maybe I'll make a custom QuickTime, like a high quality Cineform, and we'll call this Archive. Add to render queue. And now I have 3 different versions of this same timeline queued up here and ready to render. When it's time, I'm just going to select all of these and go down here and hit Start Render. And then that's going to render everything and turn green when it's done. So when it comes to rendering multiple outputs, you can absolutely do that inside of Resolve. You can open up multiple timelines. You can do different versions of the same timeline, all kinds of different things. Pretty much everything that you would expect from like a queued rendering app. So can it replace Adobe Media Encoder? Absolutely, 100%. So there you go. That's my best attempt at a detailed answer to that question. Can I switch to Resolve from whatever app I'm using? Again, I've used the whole Adobe suite for a lot of years. I came from Final Cut. I'm pretty familiar with other ways of working, and I find myself more and more going to Resolve for just about everything. And the good news is, if you're not really sure, you can download Resolve for free. The free version will work for absolutely like 99% of anything that you need to do. You can use it for commercial work. And so there's not really any risk. You can download it and try it out yourself. And if you like it and you don't really use your other apps, well, then you've already switched. So problem solved. I hope this was helpful for you. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments below. If you like this, hit like. And for more post-production tutorials on DaVinci Resolve, make sure to subscribe to my channel here on YouTube. My name again is Casey Ferris. I will catch you next time.